Okay, we needed to do an article, do a little video here on El Nino and La Nina because we've been doing a lot of articles covering a lot of news on coffee and cocoa, chocolate, etc. And we keep hearing about El Nino and La Nina affecting harvest. So let's just go to a recent summary, and we'll share the article here, and we'll give you some anecdotal stories of what exactly El Nino and La Nina are doing to some industries that we're dealing with. So this is from a few days back. It says Hurricane Beryl is likely to be one among a series of extreme Atlantic weather events this coming season, according to forecasters. This prediction is partly based on the fact that the Atlantic has continued to see warm sea surface temperatures and partly due to the anticipation of the climate event known as La Nina falling this year. As Statista's Fleck details below in this illustration, La Nina, which translates to little girl, and El Nino, or little boy, are two parts of a natural climate phenomenon called the El Niño Southern Oscillation, ENSO, which describes the changes in temperature between the ocean and atmosphere in the east central equatorial Pacific Ocean. These episodes usually take place every 2 to 7 years, depending on the conditions between Australia and South America, and last between 9 to 12 months. Although they do not always alternate, and a neutral ENSO phase is also possible. El Nino occurs more often than La Nina. So we see here, when it is a La Nina, in the brownish red, the ocean is warmer on the western side of the Pacific, and that leads to more updrafts, and therefore it's much more wet on the western side of the Pacific. And there's an island off the coast of Latin America called Easter Island. So when it's La Nina, the opposite is that on the eastern side of the Pacific, along Peru and Ecuador and Chile, it's increasingly dry. So Easter Island during La Nina is super dry. Now, when it's El Nino, that body of warm water shifts, as we see on this illustration here, further east, closer to the eastern side of the Pacific. And when it's El Nino, that sort of warm water and warm air and upswell leads to more storms along the west coast. So El Nino, there'll be more storms in California, there'll be more storms across the southern U.S., and then also in the west coast of Latin America, they'll see increased rain. And surprisingly, because of El Nino, the shear will prevent, on the other side of the United States, on the Atlantic side, prevent large hurricanes from forming, or at least diminish the amount of, because now that we're going from El Nino back to La Nina, it seems this year, it's going to be a lot of more water and rain, hopefully here in Southeast Asia, and then, but unfortunately for those in North America, that means that the Atlantic and Caribbean will have less wind shear, and therefore stronger hurricanes can form. So that is basically, in a nutshell, what we know from El Nino and La Nina. There's been many, many articles recently, and I know that the authors of this website also have to stress over and over again, the key word is that this is a natural climate phenomenon. It has absolutely nothing to do with anthropogenic, human-induced climate change, because you have people from hundreds and hundreds of years ago describing the difference between El Nino and La Nina, which is almost certainly where the name came from many, many centuries back, when you had people on boats and wind-driven boats crossing the Atlantic and Pacific. So when it comes to coffee harvest and chocolate, this is really the reason why, for example, these last few months in both Indonesia and Vietnam, there's been this decline in harvest numbers and futures for both Robusta coffee and then cocoa, but specifically for Robusta in both Vietnam and Indonesia, is because they're saying that here in Southeast Asia, there's exiting a brief El Nino phase, which means less rain. So coffee is usually harvested in the middle, towards the end of the dry season. So for example, in Vietnam, it should have been many months back, perhaps let's say March, April. and the numbers would come out by the Vietnamese government, let's say in May. And in Indonesia, there's some forecasts that the dry season would be in the middle months of the year. So right now, July, August. And so the government of Indonesia would be reporting right about now their prospective harvest numbers for this upcoming harvest season, which is about to take place as we speak. So that's why there's a little bit of flip-flop between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. But both Vietnam and Indonesia have been technically negatively affected by El Nino because if there's less rain during the rainy season, there's less beans. So when the harvest time comes after the rainy season, which is the dry season, you'll see less yield. So La Nina is very good for coffee for Vietnam and Indonesia, but when you are just finishing now an El Nino cycle, the last 12, 18 months, that's why you might have less harvest compared to previous years or overall, because El Nino created smaller beans and less total beans, and some plants might have even not survived because of the lack of rain even during the rainy season. Okay, so that is hopefully clarifies and adds much more context to what we're talking about when we cover both chocolate and cacao as commodities, as both trading opportunities and investments. All right, have a good day.